The Witcher, Nightmare of the Wolf, out on Netflix, anime prequel film taking place in the Witcher universe centered around young Vesemir, Geralt's old mentor and sword-fighting teacher. The story takes place decades before the events of the books, TV show and games. The Vesemir we meet here is very different from the one we know. Instead of a grizzled old grandpa, we have this young, quipping, sarcastic Giga Chad who throws ironic one-liners at monsters that can't understand them and uses life to the fullest. At the beginning of the film he fights a Leshen in the forest, but this particular Leshen seems different than the regular ones. Its powers are enhanced, it can apparently speak somewhat, which leads Vesemir to believe that there's something or someone more behind it. Meanwhile, in Cadwen, a sorceress is trying to convince the court that the Witchers themselves are the source of all evil, including this one. She has a huge hate boner for them for reasons initially unknown, but struggles to convince anybody without gathering actual proof. Eventually, she and Vesemir reluctantly team up to investigate the evil in the forests. So, I had kind of low expectations for this film, and they were kind of met. I think that it's pretty average overall, and it has a massive problem of being most interesting on paper for fans of the franchise, but then in execution changing so much about the source material that I think it ends up being geared more towards casual fans. Let's start with the good stuff. The animation style is alright, reminds me a little of Netflix's Castlevania, particularly the action sequences look very good, flashy and dynamic and vibrant. The plot is interesting on a high level. As is tradition for the Witcher media, it presents us with shitty people, moral dilemmas and the so-called lesser evils, although it does so in a more clunky way than the books or games. The one thing I liked most was the different look at Witchers. So far we've spent time mostly with Geralt, who himself would claim he's absolutely not a hero, but he does often display heroic qualities when push comes to shove. He's a decent person at heart. This time around, Chad Vesemir is much more cynical, cares only about himself, doesn't behave honorably in any way, chases coin and pleasure, even mentions he wouldn't shy away from scamming people for money. I think that's something we haven't really explored before, and it's a cool contrast. However, there are also problems. I thought that the voice acting was just so-so. The writing is also very questionable. Some of the moral conundrums are written fine. On the other hand, all of these sarcastic quips from Vesemir just reek of edgy anime for teenagers. I mean, it made me roll my eyes. The biggest issue for me as a fan of the source material and as a purist are of course the changes made to it. But, hear me out. I have nothing against the fact that some changes are made. For example, the fighting style is completely different, the magic is more flashy and so on. Because those changes don't significantly impact the nature of the story or the nature of the world, while it works much more better in the new medium. You're watching something visual, it's not a book, so it stands to reason that you would want to make it look, more dynamic, more fun. This stuff is okay with me. But there are also changes which seem small on paper, but they do contradict the established lore in pretty significant ways. Examples. The movie mentions a sorceress which had a child. We know from the books that that's just not possible. The connection to magic in this world makes women infertile. Or the Witcher trials for the young boys, shown in flashbacks of Kid Vesemir. At one point the kids are just thrown into a forest filled with monsters. They don't have any weapons and they proceed to get completely wiped out with only a few survivors. That's absolutely not what happens in the books and really goes against all logic. I mean, why would you deliberately kill your recruits, especially when you have trouble getting new ones? Yes, we learned that the Trial of the Grass had a low survival rate, but that's not like throwing children deliberately into monsters. It was just mutagens not reacting properly with everybody's bodies. But I'm ranting. The biggest change, in my opinion, has to do with the public opinion of Witchers in this world. In the books, there was a lot of xenophobia and paranoia directed at them. They were shunned from society as mutants, nobody wanted to really interact or fraternize with them unless they really had to. Throughout the course of the film, we don't really see that. On the contrary, a lot of the film shows that the Witchers can live pretty amazing lives. Expensive taverns, hot baths, great food, women are interested in them left and right. I mean, what's not to like? And then there's the climax of the film. This will be slightly spoilery, so beware. The finale takes place during the massacre at Kermoren. From the books, we knew that this was like an important historical event. As hate and distrust for Witchers grew among society, it eventually boiled over, and a mob of angry peasants, with the help of some sorcerers, came over to the castle and wiped out the Witchers in a bloodbath. The movie changes that, first by adding a whole host of monsters that also attack at the same time, which, yes, it makes for a better cinematic sequence, but it changes the whole point of the battle. But even worse, the plot of the film gives the mob a pretty solid reason for attacking. Again, without spoiling too much, the Witchers here are actually guilty of some pretty terrible stuff, and they don't even try to deny or justify it other than, we did it because we wanted to continue making money, and they show no signs of repentance, so it completely recontextualizes the whole thing. Previously, the entire point of the massacre was that it was an act of racism and bigotry and had no justification or basis in reality. In the film, I mean, a massacre is obviously not a cool thing to do, but you can absolutely see that there was a reason, there was a solid reason for the conflict to happen, that the Witchers brought this on themselves. I think that makes the whole world and societal situation in the Witcher universe just so much flatter and less interesting. Instead of exploring the shittiness of humanity and the casual, mundane hatred we sometimes exhibit for one another, it takes all of that away by giving that hatred an actual reason. So yeah, honestly, I think in order to stay sane, I'm probably just going to treat this film as non-canon. That will make me happier. Other than the stupid changes to the lore and some stylistic problems with the quippy dialogue though, I think it's not that terrible. If you're not a purist like me and you like the Witcher universe casually or enjoy fantasy-based anime, I think you can very well appreciate it as a simple, action-packed popcorn flick that it is.